Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Psychology of Business podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brandon Griffin, and joining me again in my virtual studio for part two is Dr. Vanessa Hills. Thank you, Vanessa, for coming in.
My pleasure. Thank you, Brandon.
Wonderful. So Dr. Hills just barely defended her dissertation, right? When did you defend?
Yes, 5 weeks ago. So I am very barely a doctor.
Well, welcome, doctor. I remember the first couple times I heard that, I'm like, who? Oh, that's me. Yep. I'm a doctor, but not that kind. I got that joke a lot.
Oh, yeah.
So Vanessa got her PhD from Western Michigan University in organizational change leadership. So I wanted to bring her on and I want to talk about what that degree is, her experience of the doctorate program, some of the challenges with the doctorate program, and why she decided to do that. So Vanessa, do you want to introduce why you wanted to get a PhD in the first place?
Yes, absolutely. I do think that one big reason is just because I enjoy education. I enjoy school. I think a lot of people in higher ed kind of enjoy it. It's a fun environment to be in. You get to talk about things that are really interesting with other people who find it interesting. So that's one big reason. But my other reason is that I was doing some consulting work and I had a master's in communication, which was really helpful for the kind of work I was doing. And I was really dealing with the fringes of organizational change. A lot of communication is part of that. And so I really enjoyed being a part of the process, but I didn't really have the tools and the knowledge of the theories and the processes and all that sort of stuff. And I wanted to know it. And so there's only so much you can do on your own. I was trying, and you can learn a lot that way. But I really wanted to build on that. And I'm lucky that Western Michigan University has a PhD in organizational change leadership. At the time, I lived about a mile away from campus. It was kind of the perfect setup. So that was a big reason for me to use it to kind of continue my work.
And why did you choose that specific one? I know Western Michigan University is a great institution, but why specifically did you choose the PhD in organizational change leadership?
Well, it's kind of hard to find actually programs specifically in organizational change leadership, right? You might find things with a lot of overlap in management, organizational development, things like that. But organizational change leadership is pretty rare to find as an entire PhD topic. So that was a big reason, because I'm passionate about change. I think it's really important. I think you can't get away from it. But I also liked the leadership component, because I don't just think it's like step 1, step 2, step 3. Once you learn all the processes, you just go and you type them in and they happen and change happens. I really do think so much of it is about people, is about the study of people. And so that's a huge part of this particular PhD is, you know, the processes, but also the people, the psychology, how people respond to change. So that was really my reason for focusing in on that specifically.
That sounds like a good fit. Could you tell us some of the coursework that you took? I know in all doctorate programs, because it's a research degree, you're going to take some research methods, you're going to take maybe some statistics courses, but could you walk us through some more of the coursework that you took to get your degree?
Absolutely. So you're absolutely right. All those research methods for qualitative, quantitative, that's a standard. And then also a lot of the courses are, kind of foundational change theories, which are important to know. Some of the OG change theories and some of the newer ones coming out, kind of a balance of both, but also understanding from the people side, group dynamics, large scale change versus, change in smaller organizations. So there's a mix of understanding the foundational change components. And then really, I think a lot of it is psychology or psychology adjacent, in terms of, understanding people's fears, people's resistance to change, kind of some of the causes of that, and how, social networks and group influence can make such a big difference in the whole change process. And remind me, oh, go ahead, Brandon.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to ask, I know organizational change leadership is just a pretty unique topic for a PhD, but what specifically was your PhD in? Was it management?
Yep. So my PhD was in business administration. That's kind of the umbrella, but it was in
Okay.
specifically management. And originally, what I wanted to do is I wanted to do strategy. So I wanted to take more of a macro view of organizations, how they impact industries. But when I got there, I actually started taking more coursework, and my research geared more towards organizational behavior. So it was in management, but my specialty is organizational behavior and leadership.
Oh, interesting. So a lot of overlap, but it's interesting how people gravitate towards slightly
Hmm.
different versions of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and mine was in the College of Business at Southern Illinois University. Where's your program housed?
So we're in the College of Education. So
Hmm.
it does seem to be, usually you're one of the two in between those two. Yeah.
Hmm. So what were some of the best parts of your PhD program? It's a journey. There are ups and downs and lefts and rights and blood, sweat, tears, everything in between. But what were some of the best parts of your PhD program?
I mean, if I have to say the best part, I I'm gonna say the people that I met. And I know that's super cliched. It's, all the friends we made along the way, but really I don't think I've made some such close friendships. You had my friend Amanda Jepson on your podcast earlier. She's, also in the PhD program. And just being in classes with people in my cohort, learning the same things I'm learning. And as you said, all those blood, sweat, and tears, people really don't know what it's exactly like until they're there. And so people who've experienced the same things as you, that's been phenomenal. But also, I would say, I feel like the degree really gave me all the tools in my tool belt. So before getting the PhD, I was like, I can do change consulting. I know what I'm doing. I've got like a hammer. I'm set. I know exactly how to do this. And then realizing that there's, 50 other tools that I can also use that I didn't even know about. So really from a practical perspective, I know, a lot of people are getting PhDs to uh, further their careers in academia, to become faculty. But for folks that are becoming practitioners, it's great when you can find a program that's also giving you a lot of those practical hands-on tools that you can use in your career later.
And is that something you wanted to do? Did you want to change courses, go into academia, or did you want to stick with the practitioner consultant route?
Can I pick both all the time? Because that's how I feel. I mean, I really enjoy teaching. I love being connected to universities. I love the campus that I live close to and am active on. But I do really like having hands-on experience. And I think it contributes to how you can make a difference in classrooms too, when you can say, I actually am doing something like this, or I did it a month ago and I can tell you about it. So I think the two work hand in hand. I just got to figure out what percentage each is going to be moving forward.
And right before we hit record, we were talking about how sometimes the research that's done in the academy can get disconnected from what practitioners are doing or what's actually being done in the industry. So if you're letting your work influence your research, and if you're letting your research influence your work, I think that's best case scenario. That's what I'm trying to do with this podcast. But with balancing that, there are going to be challenges as well. And I don't know your background, but or I don't know your background as much, but were you a full time student? Were you working while you're doing your PhD? What was that like?
So I was a full-time student in that I did the program in the 3 years, which is fairly normal for this program. But I was working the whole time as well. So some of the time I was a university employee, and some of the time I was an independent consultant. So that has varying hours. Sometimes it's really, really busy, and sometimes you have a quieter week. So yeah, balancing both for sure is hard. Um, PhD programs vary a lot. The one that I was in really has a lot of full-time employees or part-time employees who are, taking these classes in the evenings and juggling a lot of things. I find very impressive, especially folks who are juggling having a family with all of this. Yeah, I'm very impressed. Hats off. So yeah, I was doing a little bit of both. Yeah.
Hmm. So, what were some of the hardest parts? Obviously, that work life balance between actually not even work school life balance, just that throwing another variable to that equation. But what were some of the hardest things about the doctoral experience?
Oh, I like that. Yeah, life is just a
You don't have
afterthought.
a
Like, oh
social
yeah,
life.
and
You
and
don't.
some life if you can fit it in. Maybe it's optional. Um, yeah, I think some of the hardest things are, I think initially kind of understanding that a PhD is not as directed as, other programs can be. Obviously, there's coursework and things like that, and you know the expectations. But, sometimes you are kind of left to your own devices, and at the end of it, you're supposed to have some original knowledge. And it's like, oh, you really have to self-direct a lot. So that was a little uncomfortable for me at first. And then once I understood, okay, this is actually really exciting. Now I'm in control of what I get to do. But for sure, that was a challenge for me. And I mean, you're not too far ahead of me, Brandon. You defended earlier this year. What were some of the biggest challenges for you?
Sure. So I left my PhD a year early. I was ABD, and then I actually defended at the end of my first year in May, I believe. So it's been 5 6 months. But the hardest part for me, there was a lot. So personal life, I moved across the country. That was hard. During COVID, that was hard. There's a lot of things, personal life. But in terms of the actual PhD, I felt like research was a new language. I was a good student. If you gave me an assignment, I could do it. But they expect you in a PhD program, because it's a research oriented program. You need to read the literature and you need to do something new, like what you're talking about. But you have to learn lingo. I remember when you do research, you kind of have to do it in the theories and in the languages that already exist. And I remember when I got there, I said, "Oh, I want to do research on this. I think this is a good idea." And my professors would come back and they're like, "Okay, what theories are going to be based in, or what XYZ, what's going to happen there?" And that took me a long time to kind of learn the language of academia. But also, I think a frustrating thing for a lot of people is like, "Oh, I have this really cool idea," and you go on Google Scholar and you search. Someone did it in like 1993. So it just took me a long time. I think I was slower at first than a lot of my other colleagues, just learning how research gets done. And that was really hard for me because I've been a good student. I think a lot of people get into a PhD program. They're people who've never really struggled with schoolwork, but it's a whole new ballgame creating knowledge. You're not just learning and synthesizing this knowledge. You're learning and synthesizing, and then you have to come up and create something new. It's A plus B equals C. You have to come up with something. So that was a really hard part for me, was the language of research. But I think by the time I got to my comprehensive exams and dissertation, I worked a lot and had some really good professors who pushed me hard to kind of break through that boundary of research. So now I'm at a point where, I'm still trying to get a lot of my research streams further down the line, but I feel like I'm at a good spot where I know how to research and I, can do things now.
That's awesome. Well, then it worked. Then it was a successful program because you feel confident and ready to continue doing more research. That's wonderful.
And I still think there will always be a degree of imposter syndrome, and do I belong here? Am I really a PhD? Do I really know? And is that what's it called? Is it the Dunning-Kruger effect? That's if someone knows a little bit in something, they believe they're an expert. That's honestly kind of how I felt like after a week or two. I'm like, I'm reading these academic journals. I'm pretty big shot now. And then after a month or two, I'm like, what am I doing here? I do not belong here. But now I'm to a point where I'm like, I have my specialties. I know what I know, but there's a lot that I don't know still. Um, so yeah, that's some of the things my experience of my PhD.
Oh yeah, I completely relate. I think one big change from the beginning of the PhD to the end is in the beginning I was like I have to know everything, and now I'm like no, I just have to define my scope and I know this thing, and that's okay. That's what we're doing, is becoming experts in a pretty small
Hmm.
subset of knowledge, and that's fine. That's we are the experts in that thing now, so that's awesome.
So a lot of people can get through the coursework, but I think I can't remember what the specific statistic is, but I think the majority of students who drop out of a PhD program do so between their coursework and their dissertation. It's actually getting that dissertation done. How did you find your topic? How did you actually put words on the page? How did you actually get it done? Tell us about your dissertation experience.
Oh, that's a big question because it was a big experience. um, I actually came into the PhD program with one idea about what I was going to study, and I went with that for about a year and a half, and then turned out that was not going to be a good topic to study. So I completely shifted. So that was pretty scary because I was not starting from scratch, but going in a whole new direction, and I was terrified. Um, but once it came to the actual writing of the dissertation, I I was a writer for about 10 years, so the writing part didn't scare me. It was more the collecting data that was really scary because I was interviewing, you know, really high up executives at big companies and traveling and spending, I think I spent 90 minutes, uh, like 2 weeks, so 3 hours total with each executive. And I was terrified that I was going to waste their time or spend 3 hours and then be like, well, that's not even usable, that I asked the wrong questions or something. So that was a little nerve wracking for me. And then the writing part is finding time to do it. I know people have lots of different strategies. For me, it was early morning stuff before anyone's awake and can interrupt me and before I get too easily distracted by something else. But yeah, it just takes a lot of time. It's a labor of love for sure.
Love, that's, I don't know if I'd say love on some days. Some days it's a labor of let's get this over with. But I had a great experience, and it sounds like you did too after, getting over some of those initial hurdles. So if someone wants to follow in your footsteps, get a PhD either in organizational change leadership or in some type of similar field, what advice do you have for someone who's looking to get a PhD?
Oh, I think something that we both touched on is just understanding the difference between, a second master's and the generating of new knowledge. Because I think some people are exceptional students and incredibly smart people, but there's a big difference between coming up with new things, new thoughts, and then just learning a lot and becoming an expert on something. So, yeah, I mean, that was a huge transition for me. Luckily, I feel like I bridged the gap, but I would really think about, is that what you want, or do you want to become an expert in something? Not necessarily creating new knowledge, just learning things, because you don't necessarily have to get a PhD to do that. So I would think about whether that's something that you're excited about. And if you are, amazing. This is the spot for you to be in. Absolutely.
I agree with that. If you had to go back and change one thing about your experience, whether it's something you did, something you didn't do to make your PhD easier, what would it be?
Oh, I mean, I told you that I switched topics halfway through. Do not recommend that. I think it would have been better to come in with some kind of belief that this was not going to change. That would have been really nice because you do so much work, in the early coursework. You're writing lit reviews and reading stuff. Be great if I could have um, made sure that all my coursework was building toward the dissertation. And I still got the skills and the knowledge, but it would have been nice to have some of that early work done by the time I got to the dissertation phase. Would have been amazing.
And I think that's something where, hindsight's 2020, because I think a lot of people come in and they think they're going to study one thing, but, they read a paper or two, or maybe do a lit review, take a class, and it turns out their idea has been done, or maybe they just aren't interested in it, or maybe it'd be too hard to collect data. But I think that's part of the learning experience, is just the struggle is, kind of what makes the PhD program and what makes you a good researcher, is figuring out what you like and what you don't like.
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of the process and part of the program, really, I think, is you're learning what you don't want to study just as much as what you do want to study.
And I think a lot of times we can forget that sometimes you go through the grind of ups and downs of research and writing, and sometimes it just feels like a job. But there are certain times, and I've been kind of going through this lately, of honestly, ever since the conference, I've kind of had a renaissance again. I'm like, oh yeah, I do like research, all this really interesting stuff. Because me as a university professor, as you, someone as a consultant, I'm sure you get bogged down with, your job that you're doing, where sometimes the research you're doing can get on the back burner. And when you kind of get out of touch with the literature, maybe there have been a couple of journal articles that have come out, or maybe you haven't touched the project in a long time, you can lose momentum. So one advice that I'd have for myself, but something else that just came to my mind, is make sure that you're just involved with your research. Don't lose touch of what's going on, because it can be really easy to, not write a page for a day or for a week, turns into a month or 3 months. But just, try to stay involved with research. But that's also going to ebb and flow, because some projects or some days, I think research is going to be, your research is going to be a lot more interesting. But the reason why you're doing a PhD is hopefully because there's something you're really passionate in. So that's why conferences are good, where you can kind of reignite that flame.
Absolutely. And why it's great to have in between those conferences friends that you can talk to like this about things to, I'm sure after we've talked today, I'm going to leave and have a couple more ideas like, oh, Brandon phrased that in a way that I hadn't thought about. And you get new ideas talking to people. So Try not to silo yourself. You're spot
Well,
on.
with some of those new ideas, I'd love to have you back on talking about new things you're working on in the future.
Fantastic. That sounds great, Brandon.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Vanessa Hills, PhD, thank you so much for coming on to the Psychology of Business podcast.
Thank you. Have a good day, Brandon.
Yep. See you later, everyone. Have a great day. Happy learning. Bye.